Hey, it's Dr. Glenn Wixson here, back for another 7 Billion Geniuses video. And today I'm going to talk about how we created hatred. And there's a couple of really basic ideas that I've talked about in previous videos, but I'm going to speak to again so you get the context of what I'm talking about in terms of this creation of hatred. There's some larger ideas that are sort of mushed together to create this, this idea that I'm going to try and put across today. One of them is about the culture and how it's evolved since our origins as kind of hunter-gatherers. And another one is about the difference between feelings and beliefs. And so I'm going to talk really about hatred as a belief. The primary difference for me between feelings and beliefs is the idea that you can't feel like somebody's a jerk. You believe they're a jerk. And the reason why that's important, it's strategically important or functionally important to think about that difference, because ultimately if we think about why we believe somebody might be a jerk, we can go through a process of making a determination about why we have that belief. I have an issue with the idea of considering that a feeling, because unfortunately the notion of feeling kind of places that into this context of something that is sacred and that can't be messed with and that just has to be honored and respected. This is not to say that the belief that somebody's a jerk wouldn't be honored and respected, but it would be, in fact, I would say that thinking about it as a belief is a way to honor it and respect it further, because you have then the opportunity to find out what supports that belief. So anyway, two major concepts that we're going to be dealing with today in the context of this, our creation of this notion of hatred. But before I get into it any more fully, I want to show you a graphic. We're going to go back out to the chalkboard, and I'm going to show you something that I hope is useful. So here we have on the chalkboard is a graphic representation of time measured in years, and every one of these segments represents 1,000 years. So there's 1,000, there's 1,000, there's 1,000, and so 1,000 years, 11,500 years to here, approximately 23,000 years to here. Let me show you something really important, because in order to think about this in the context of how long we've been around as a human species, which is between 1 and 4 million years, depending on who you ask, you'd have to go from here all the way to here. And that's only 720,000 years. And the reason why that's so important is because that's 720,000 years. That's not even the whole entire million years that we've been around. It's not even close. I have to go into the woods, probably all the way over to Haley Road, in order to get close to the 4 million years that it's possible that we've been around. And it's the entirety of our human existence. But let's just say that it's a million years, which is a bit further than where I just was over there. This amount of time represents how long we've been agricultural, which means the beginning of an agricultural society where we plant instead of relying on the earth. And this teeny little thing between my fingers is how long hate has been around. And by hate, I mean the origin of the word. According to the resources that I was able to locate, the idea of hate goes back to 200 years BC, between 200 and 400 years BC. This is the amount of time that we're talking about where hate has been a part of our culture. And I'm going to talk to you today about why I think it was created, why I think it's not a part of who we are as a species, and what we can do to change the effects that it has in our life. Something that people who know me won't be at all surprised to hear is that I think about life in the context of choices that we can make. That we have a profound amount of ability to actually modify our lives by the things that we do in the moments that we live in. That really all of our power exists right here, right now. Here and now for me, which is different than here and now for you, since you're going to be watching this, some point later on in the week. Whereas here I am on Sunday recording it. But the power that I have, yes, is right here, right now. And the power that you have is where you are and when you are, which is your here and now. And so this hate thing that, as you saw on the graphic, really represents a very, very small part of our existence, is something that we can make choices into, since I in fact am saying that it's not just a part of who we are. So one of the reasons why I say it's not a part of who we are goes back to that larger segment that we looked at, the connection between us as a species and agriculture. And agriculture, I believe, had a profound effect on us as a people, and actually is the origins of this notion of hatred. Now, I'm not suggesting in any way that agriculture is a bad thing, because in fact what you're looking at right now is my fairly substantial garden where I grow strawberries and potatoes and pumpkins. Composters over there. There's a whole other section over there that you can't even see. So clearly agriculture is something that I've embraced in my own life and find very rewarding. But when we made the choice 11,500 years ago to change the way that we lived and move away from our hunter-gatherer roots that had been a part of our history for a substantial amount of time, given what I just showed you, to agriculture, where we would plant and we would be connected to the land in a completely different way, there were consequences and substantial changes in the context of how we live our lives. Because you see, before agriculture and the idea that this is my land and I use this land to create the thing that keeps me alive, and I am responsible for using this land and making this food so I stay alive, there was no need for hatred. There was no space for hatred. Hatred wouldn't even have been conceived, because there would never have been somebody who could come along and take my land, somebody who could impose themselves on my sense of having my own destiny, regardless of whether it's land or food or people or possessions or whatever it happens to be. Take my freedom. The idea was that the earth and I were in a process together, and that sometimes the bear would win and sometimes I would win, because the larger flow of how the earth conducts itself wasn't just about me. It was about the earth, and it was about the flow of life, and it was about the idea that sometimes the resources are for one and sometimes the resources are for another. And in a place like that, hatred simply doesn't exist, because you don't hate the bear because you get eaten. And this was, in fact, for me, one of the most profound realizations of not so much of not seeing hatred in my fellow man, where I do, but of, in fact, not seeing it in our creature cousins. The nut does not hate the squirrel for eating it. The squirrel does not hate the fisher cat for eating the squirrel. The parents of the young wildlife that are killed as a part of the process of life for their creature cousins do not hate the predator that kills. There is no hate manifest in anything that you would see about these relationships, and so that affected me profoundly, that absence of hatred and in its existence in me and my cousins. When our relationship with land changed from thinking about it as something that was sacred, or maybe even not thinking about it as something that was it, quite possibly having our sense of land and each other be completely connected and interwoven, and we start to separate out this idea of land, this idea of something that can be possessed. And not only this notion of possession, but also interwoven with that is the fact that in order to achieve agriculture, in order to plant, you need land. And as you have land, as the food source becomes more reliable, you end up with a larger growing stable population, and then you need more land. And so people who lived in places where their land wasn't necessarily as good as the land of the people next door made their land something that they all of a sudden needed, wanted. It would be, and since it's become a thing, it would become something that could be taken. So we move from a time of land being a sacred partnership, land being something that's really a part of us, to land being something that's a commodity that we need to survive as we adopt this agricultural perspective and way of living, and then is something that we need more and more and more of. You see, the thing about hate that strikes me is that it is, in fact, at least in my understanding of it, it is a response to something that seems life-threatening. It is a response to something that's being impinged upon us that puts us in a position of risk. So let me say a little bit about what I mean by hate. For me, hate is a belief, and it's the belief that somebody else can take something from you that's vital to you, that they can destroy me, that I would hate someone if they could destroy me in the context of some actions that they would take about me or my family, take on me or my family, or something that mattered to me, and have some destructive effect. And the striking thing about that idea, if you agree when you think about hate that it's a similar thing, then here's what I'm struck by. The idea that we have moved away from a profoundly spiritual connection to existence, which suggests this: the notion that my life is something that exists now and might not exist tomorrow, and that whether or not it exists tomorrow is in some ways up to me and my choices, but it's also a function of a whole larger arc of reality. Put simply, the idea that one day I win and one day the bear wins, and neither one of those is right or wrong. That we survive when we can survive, we survive when we have the resources that we need to have access to because we're given those freely from the earth, and that happens some days and it doesn't happen other days. And on those days when it doesn't happen, it's not wrong, it's not bad, it's just what it is. We have moved so far away from this way of thinking about life to the point where we believe that I live because I win, I live because I'm right, I live because I do the right things, and if I don't live, something profoundly wrong has happened, or something has been taken away from me that is justly mine, and I have the right to hate whatever or whoever did that. If you think about how you might take on a perspective of your success or failure in your day-to-day life, based on things that I'm saying are really completely out of our control, but that we've taken on as something that is in our control, and something that we're somehow supposed to be responsible for. Meaning how the sun goes, whether or not there's enough water in Hawaii, these incredibly vast variables that affect the earth and things that happen in it all the time. And yet somehow, if things don't turn out in certain ways, if the stock market doesn't continue to climb, if my income doesn't continue to climb, if my children don't get better jobs than I have, if their income doesn't continue to climb, we consider that to be a bad outcome. And we start to point fingers at why those outcomes happened the way that they were, regardless of whether that finger pointing even makes sense, and that gives us another opportunity to hate, to turn our sense of how things are supposed to be, given this sense of control that we inherited when we took on these notions of agriculture, moving our way of living away from one that was connected to the flow of the earth and the weather and what was available and what wasn't available, to try to say that we were really responsible for making things happen, and if they didn't happen the way we thought they were supposed to, it was somebody else's responsibility, or could be somebody else's responsibility, and then we could give them the hatred that they so rightly deserved. So to recap, what I'm saying is that hatred is a cultural artifact of choices that we made when 11,500 years ago we turned away from a practice of living that was connected to the earth and the ebb and flow of the earth, to practices of agriculture where we tried to take responsibility for what food was available and when. The consequences of that, I've talked about specialization in other videos, and the way that we've moved into a place where work is a central and fundamental part of our daily life. Work, not work in terms of contributions, but work in terms of gathering resources, accumulating money, trying to create security in those kinds of ways. And that we have been taught that accumulation entitles us to certain things, and then when things don't go the way they're supposed to go in the context of those entitlements and the idea of our accumulations intended to create a safety, this is where hate comes from, that we can then point the finger at some other person or entity or government or place and say that they are responsible for what is not happening for me in my life, and further to say that the assumption is that my survival is supposed to happen, that I am supposed to survive in all this, and there's no openness to the idea that survival happens for some people and some animals and some species sometimes, and for others at other times. And that in the context of a flow of the earth, these things happen in a natural way. Please don't understand what I'm saying to suggest that the extinction of species that's going on right now in the context of the way we're living our lives is a part of what I'm talking about. I am actually talking about the opposite. As we continue to appropriate resources and our waste continues to flow out like a river of garbage into every single environment, the loss of species has to do with our appropriation of land, loss of habitat for other animals, and our pollution of every environment imaginable. It is in fact a manifestation of the same system that created hatred. Completely different ways of thinking. In one, we realize that sometimes the bear wins and sometimes we win. In the other, the assumption is that we're always supposed to win, and when we don't win, something is wrong, something bad has happened, and hatred evolves. So I said there was going to be good news in this video, and I believe that there is. I believe that the profound good news about this, if you believe what I've already told you about the amount of time that hatred's been a part of our existence, a very, very small part of that continuum of time, and that it is in fact a manifestation of our relationship to agriculture and a transition in the way that we live away from thinking about us in relationship to the land and thinking about land as possession, then you see that that in the context of choices that we can make about our lives, that we can make different choices about whether hatred is going to be a part of our existence. And so when you find yourself in a position where this welling up of this sense of right and wrong starts to overtake you, and you start to feel the desire to be violent to other people, either through words or thoughts or actions, consider the origins of that experience that you're having, and the idea that you might take out those actions on somebody either through thoughts or words or real physical actions from a place of thinking that you and you alone are entitled to certain things, and that your life is somehow supposed to be a certain way, and that this person or this animal or this culture or this country is attempting to take something away from you that is absolutely essential, that you cannot possibly live without. Now I hope that nobody thinks for a moment that I'm not aware of what I'm asking you to do. And I'll tell you something. Everybody who knows me knows I'm not asking you to do anything that I'm not going to do myself. And what I'm doing in my own life is I'm moving myself away from the ideas of hatred, because I'm no longer willing to use them from this philosophy of everything that goes on in my life is supposed to go on in a certain way. And if it doesn't go that way, then it's wrong. And I realize, without any shadow of a doubt, that there are many, many things that I have in my life, mostly people who I love, that if their life was taken and I no longer had them in my life, it would be profoundly hurtful to me. But what I'm telling you right now is that what I'm willing to do is say that somehow there's a larger purpose in this that I'm not aware of and that I'm not in control of, and that it is not up to me to make the determination about who's supposed to live and who's not to. And so then having the willingness to see a larger perspective of all these things. And here's why. When we take up hatred as a culture, we put ourselves in a position of moving in a direction that has no positive outcome and that's not sustainable. Because ultimately, if we think about ourselves and our existence, whether it comes down to our country or our community, our state, our town, our own personal selves, as being somehow inevitably prioritized, that it's absolutely essential that we stay alive, there's nowhere for us to go. There's no way that we can always stay alive. In fact, we're a species that has a limited time frame, and we do things in our lives in order to live meaningful and powerful lives that require risk and chance, and that things happen to us, and change happens, and people die. And if we're going to take up the position that any time anybody dies who I care about, that there's somebody else that I can blame and hate, I don't know where that gets us. It certainly hasn't gotten us anywhere that's been particularly good. And so, yeah, it's quite a task that I'm proposing here. But again, I'm proposing to take it up myself and already have. But to say that the benefits that me and the people that come after me will receive from my taking a way more open view about destiny, that those effects will be profound and worthwhile. And what I've seen as an alternative isn't going to work out in anybody's benefit. So, hope this has been useful, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch. I hope you do subscribe, and I hope you do stay in touch. And I'll talk to you next week.